count 9 stones.
Yeah, so I saw
The driver was
that.
unbelievably lucky to have come out of it alive.
absolutely.
My goodness.
Yeah, I
I
saw
mean-
the picture. You see the photo? Oh my goodness.
Well, I've got more graphic photos, but I'm
I
not
can
showing them. But
No, I'm sure.
When did this happen?
2 o'clock this morning.
Oh my days. I
Yeah.
haven't seen or heard anything about it.
No, it has actually been on social media, and
Yes, it
it will be all over the papers. And I mean,
no,
people just don't have anything more interesting to talk about.
Yeah,
So at least the cemetery is making the news for things other than a ridiculous death rate.
Yeah.
How are we all doing? Good evening.
Oh, good
Good
evening.
Rabbi.
Thank
Good
you,
evening,
Rabbi. Thank you for the magazine. Thanks, Rabbi.
The only ones I've got left. Can everyone mute? That'd be great. Viv, can I ask you a question? Because you just sent me an email. I've just seen it. Can I ask you a question about that? Or do you want to not talk about it publicly?
I don't mind. That's fine.
No, just before we get into our share, just very quickly. The only question I've got, I need to think about it properly. But did the onions and the garlic go? Is the meat in the pan that the omelette was cooked in, or just the onions and the garlic, and they're in a separate pan?
Just the onions and the garlic, and they were cut with, I expect, a meat knife on the meat chopping board.
Okay, but the meat itself isn't. Okay.
No,
so
the meat was in a saucepan. In the saucepan, didn't go near the
Fine.
frying pan.
Okay, so it's just the meaty onion and garlic that is in the milky sauce. Okay, and that's okay.
Yeah,
What material is that frying pan?
Well, that's why I sent a picture, because it's sort of got a solid. It's a very good frying pan, so it's got like a solid non-stick surface. But we've just rinsed it.
Iron one. It's like a cast iron one, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. And it's we've just rinsed it in cold water and put it on the side.
Okay. Definitely don't bury it. See another share from a different topic. Okay, thank you. Leave it with me. I'll come back to you.
I can think of lots of things to do with it, but he's disappointed.
Tell him not to run away yet. We will. We'll get there. Okay. Lovely. Good evening, everyone. How are we? Good. Lovely to see you.
Good evening.
Oh, I don't know who that was. It was a voice from the heavens. Lovely to see you. Those I can see. Lovely to hear those I can hear. Michael Swan's sticking his thumb up in the air. Good stuff. So we're continuing joining in the Mutmid program. So we've done, what did we do? We did Geirus, we did conversion for a few weeks, we did Kashrus for a few weeks. So this next little mini series is on the topic loosely of Avelut, mourning, and it's quite a broad topic, and there were many things I was thinking about dealing with. But I thought I would start a bit different and talk about sort of the origins and the attitudes that we have to the group of people we affectionately call the Chevra Kadisha. The Chevra, the group, I suppose. Kadisha, Aramaic word for Kodesh, the holy group, which is a very fitting, appropriate title for those people that work in the Chevra Kadisha, in the group of people that are charged with, or have the responsibility for taking care of those that have passed away, and all those matters. So this is something that affects every single person, as we know. And I just thought it'd just be interesting, not in a particularly heavy way, but just to look at some of the origins, and we'll see some of the different practices. We're not going to be talking about the workings of Bushy United Synagogue. I think Linda is on the call. If you have any practical questions, I'm sure she's happy to stay on the Zoom call for 6 or 7 hours after this. Linda, speak now or forever hold your peace, because I'm just, I knew you'd pop up if I was there. No, we're not going to be talking about Bushy specifically, but I'm sure as and when things come up that I've said wrong, Linda will correct me.
You never say anything wrong.
No, not wrong, just not the way we do it at Bushy, right? No, we're not going to be doing that kind of thing. But of course, if towards the end things come up that you want to talk about, with pleasure, our resident expert. I will say about Bushy, as Linda is here, not to embarrass her or anything like that, but I interact with so many people, as you all realize, on so many different levels. The one consistent is when people deal with the Burial Society, and we have, and I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have for various reasons, but consistently, it's the feedback I get the most is just, wow, it was amazing to deal with the burial society, the people, the sensitivity, the direction, and it's heartwarming that people, when they're feeling most vulnerable, most affected emotionally, have that support from a truly wonderful team. So as you're there, Linda, you know, I try to always say it to them as well, and give them the proper respect. Give you all the proper respect, but you can pass that back as well.
I will. Thank you.
So everyone except Linda can answer the following question: what do we know about the Chevra Kadisha? And I've left that very broad to make it a little bit interactive. What do we know about the Chevra Kadisha? Now, there are also a couple of you, I think, that are more involved in it, and there are definitely a couple of you that are more involved in it. So maybe if you're involved in it, and I don't know how public that is, that people know, let's have you not speak as well. But what do we know about the Chevra Kadisha, the role of, and I'm keeping it all broad, the Chevra Kadisha? Anyone like to speak? And if you are involved, you can still speak. They have an annual dinner. Thank you very much, David Lerner. They do. In fact, if you really want to know, they have several, because you have the men's one, and you have the ladies one, and then you have the East London one, and the West London one, and the honorary officers one. And you know, I'm sure Linda has many dinners with the team. The Chevra Kadisha dinner. Yes, they have an annual dinner. As we've mentioned it. Anyone know what did it go on, David? What would you like to say?
What I'd like to say is I once told Howard.
Speak up.
Can you hear?
Now I can.
I once told Howard Pearl of our Chevra Kadisha that one of my biggest anxieties, and I'm serious about this, is being buried alive, having once heard a program about how many people used to get buried alive. Howard promised me that after the Chevra Kadisha had finished with me, I could be sure I was dead.
Thanks for that, David.
Because of the way they cleanse the body and look after things.
What?
Because of the way they cleanse the body and return it to a state
I'm
of
sure
purity.
there are absolutely no modern day anecdotes of someone getting to the Tahara room, the washing room, not being dead. So nothing to do with Bushy. I'd be very surprised. There was that great video going around about the imam, the rabbi, and the priest, and it was on social media a couple of years ago, and they were all being interviewed. You know, what would you want to say at your funeral? And the priest gave some very emotive thing, and the imam gave, and they said to the rabbi, "So, Rabbi, what would you want to say at your funeral?" And he says, "He's still moving." So yes, thank you for that, David. So what do we know about the Chevra? They have an annual dinner. What do we know about them? Or what don't we know about them? Traditionally? No? Okay. Well, maybe your silence is a reflection of the fact that it's pretty much a secret society. And when I say secret society, it's not discussed. Those members of our Chevra Kadisha, they don't speak about it. We don't make a huge fuss of them. And it's not something, there's no t-shirts that say Chevra Kadisha. And in many communities, it's not really discussed. It's a very tsanua, very modest and very quiet and very hugely crucial aspect of our community. Now, where does it come up? I want to look a little bit through some of the sources. I've got some quite interesting sources to show you. So I'm going to share my screen. If you've got the sheets, they're basically, and you've printed them out to read. I know the Morrison Woods always do that. And I always feel like apologizing because I tend to, because I need to send them to Sharon like 3 years in advance. So I sometimes go back in the afternoon and add a few things, which I have done. But let me show you what I've got here. So something I talk about a lot because I think it's so important is the first time we discuss burial really in any proper way, I didn't bring on the sheet here, is that of Sarah Imenu. Avraham buries his wife, and that's one of his tests, that's one of his challenges. He has to bury his wife Sarah. We have the Marat Machpelah, the cave of Machpelah, and we don't really know much about that burial. But when we see here, right at the end of the book of Bereshit, in the first source, when Yaakov is about to die, Vayikruvu Yemei Yisrael, Lamut vayikra livnoi li Yosef. So the days of Jacob's life are, coming to an end, and he calls his son Yosef to him. And he says to him, if I have found favor in your eyes, simna yadecha tachas yarchi va'asisi amadi. Put your hand by my thigh, i.e., make me this promise. Do for me this. What is it? Chesed ve'emes. Do me this. This is very hard to translate, very easy words to translate, a phrase that is very hard to translate. Chesed, what's chesed? Kindness, if we want. Emes, truth. Do for me this kindness, truth. Anna, you must not bury me. Where? In Mitzrayim. Yaakov will not be buried in Mitzrayim, and he makes Yosef promise him that you will not allow me to be buried in Mitzrayim. And as we know, at the end of the book of Bereshit, after Yaakov dies, they get special permission from Pharaoh to leave Egypt, and they take the body back, and they bury him in Marat Machpelah, in the cave of Machpelah, with his family. What is this chesed ve'emes? Do me this chesed ve'emes. Do me this righteous truth, this ultimate truth. This has become, says Rashi explains chesed ve'emes, chesed she'oisin im hamesim. It is this chesed, it is this kindness, this mercy, is the translation here, that is shown to those that have passed away. Chesed shel emes. This is a chesed shel emes. She'einu mitzaper l'sashlum gmul. That it is the one thing that you can do. So Rashi seems to say specifically, it's the one thing you can do for which there is no rewards. There is no specific mitzvah of this. This is no reward for this. This is just something we can do. I always like to reference what is chesed ve'emes or chesed shel emes when it comes to death. It's the ultimate giving because it's the one thing you can give to a person that they can never pay you back for. So these are the first discussions in Torah around burial and death. Chesed ve'emes. But that's really a sort of impression. That's a perspective of it. It's not an obligation here. We're just looking at sort of the identity of it. I bought this picture. Does anyone know where this picture is from? Before I show you the blurb. Anyone know? This is a famous picture. If you've been to Prague, to the shuls, you'll have seen this picture. In fact, can I get this up? I want to share it 1 second. It comes from this. I don't know what you're looking at now. Can you see these pictures? Just nod if you can see these pictures. Right, because I'm using 2 screens. You can see these pictures. So this is from a catalogue, a brochure that you'll find online, as I did, but I looked at this when we went to Prague, and you go to the different, if you've been to Prague and you've seen the 6 different shuls there, and you can go and get tours around them, and in a couple of the shuls, they have this up. So this was a set of, I think it's 15 paintings. I've got the blurb here, 1 second. The Prague Burial Society, which was actually called formerly the Chevra Kadisha Gomei Chasadim, right? The holy gathering, the holy group of people that do chesed, good stuff, righteousness. So they established it in Prague in 1564, and the Holy Society of Benevolent Women also, so there was 2 groups, there was the men's one and the women's one, and they obviously cared for the deceased, and it was formally acknowledged in 1692. They have, with over 10,000 Jews in Prague, had the largest Jewish population of any European city, and at the end of the 17th century. So then 15 of these paintings that you can see on the sheet now, if I scroll down, are all being drawn, beautiful, incredible paintings, and each one showing a different aspect of the role of what this Chevra Kadisha did. So from, in those days, a little bit, now it's sort of in the way we interact with the Chevra Kadisha, it usually happens only at the point of death, whereas in these days, it's quite clear that they were very involved in visiting the sick, in prayers by deathbeds, and then once obviously a person has passed away, everything that sort of we're familiar with today. And these paintings are really quite incredible, and just an insight into, again, this was sort of the 1700s in Prague, and we have obviously have a working group. Let me just stop that a second. We have a working group there of people that are very involved in the Chevra Kadisha. So I want to go back to my sheet now. Right. So anyway, if you have the source sheet and you want to link to that, I put a link in the source sheet if you're interested in looking at the pictures properly, because it's just interesting to see what to I went. But the question I have for the Olam is, and this is an important question, the question I have for the group is, we know that there is great sanctity placed on human life, and we know what we have to do to protect human life, and the importance that we put on human life and protecting each other and protecting our bodies and protecting all that. We know that. But we also place that same level of sanctity on protecting a person that has passed away, on a dead body. And the question I want to ask you is why? If we think about it logically, we are built up of a guf, a body, our physical form that we interact with in this world, and a neshama, a soul. God breathes life into us, a piece of him, a tselem elokim, into our essence, into our soul. And the soul is our essence. It's our connection with God. It's our connection with each other. It is infinite. It is eternal. And then when a person dies, the body returns to the dust of the earth, but it's the soul, it's our neshama, it's our essence that goes to heaven. So why is it so important to us to treat the guf in such a way? Would anyone like to share with me any thoughts?
Yeah, because the body has, although it's no longer has the neshama, it's been a receptacle for the neshama and therefore can't just be discarded.
It's a good answer. And thank you. Anyone else?
It's the vessel through which we did mitzvahs.
Oh, it's similar, I think, to Graham. It's, this is the neshama was placed in this vessel. This is a vessel that did mitzvot. You could argue, okay, but no, the real essence of the mitzvot were by the neshama, not by the guf, not by the body. But yeah, all beautiful. Anthony?
Because you need it for the resurrection.
Oh, okay. So there's Techias HaMeitim, right? Techias HaMeitim, the resurrection of the dead, which is one of our fundamental beliefs. And if someone is going to be resurrected, don't we need the body? One could argue that maybe, we believe in reincarnation as well. So maybe it could be an old body, it doesn't have to be a new body. But yeah, you need a body to come back to. So yes, that's definitely something that's very important.
Wouldn't that be a problem because of the Holocaust? So if you're saying there has to be a physical body,
we're not talking about that. Sorry.
No, but I'm saying that can't be the reason.
What can't be the reason?
The idea that there has to be a physical body, because otherwise you're saying that 6 million Jews don't get resurrected.
Well, 6 million Jews weren't.
No,
all right. You're saying 6 million, but a lot were cremated. It's not a topic I want to go down now, but it could work that way if God says it works that way. Meaning, one of the reasons we don't practice cremation is for that reason. Does that make sense? I hear what you're saying. I don't want to go. Where's he gone? Arthur? Yeah, there you are. I just don't want to go there now. But I hear what you're saying. But it's too raw. It's off on.
I understand.
I hear what you're saying.
I'm saying that the body must have other reasons.
Okay. From that perspective, okay, sure. David Simmons.
Yes, I recall a parallel sort of thing. But when we got the shul refurbished and we got a new ark, I went in because I was taking photographs and I was speaking to the chief carpenter, or whatever his name was, and he said, we've got a delay because we're trying to find the answer to a question. How much of the timbers and parts of the old Aron have to be set aside and buried or burned because they've been in contact with Sifrei Torah? And perhaps this is a parallel, that the body's been in contact with the soul and the person, and this continues, and there is a sort of holiness by association, if you like.
David, that is such a beautiful answer that I hadn't thought about, and I really like that. Thank you. Just to clarify what David's talking about, just because the sounds a bit funny, at least on my computer, when we were doing the refurbishment works, so we had to dig out totally the ark, and even just now when we did that, when the cupboards were taken out as well, so the very old store cupboard that was used to store Sifrei Torah. So anything that is everything that we hold to be sort of kodesh, holy, like a Sefer Torah, has to be obviously dealt with appropriately, and we know about Seamus and stuff, and maybe we'll do a show on that as well. But not only that, anything that is used to store something like that has to be dealt with properly. So the doors and the walls, again, it's very complicated exactly what, but a certain part, anything that really housed itself, stored the Sefer Torah, also had to be buried. And you're saying there's no intrinsic holiness in those cupboards, doors, shelves, but because they housed, contained, stored something that we consider to be holy, that we treat them with holiness as well. And I actually think that was probably closest to my answer, David, and thank you very much for sharing that, is that the neshama, the soul, is created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God, and therefore the body has a part to play in storing that. And therefore, I think it was already said as well, and therefore it would be seen as, definitely disrespectful if we would treat the body in that way as well, or in a bad way as well, if we don't treat it in a proper way. And I think, again, taking together what everyone said, but I think it's important that we think and talk about these things. Okay, it's obvious to us we have to be respectful, but it's also important to think about why and where it comes from. David Lerner, and then I want to go into some of the sources. Yes.
All right. Number one, notwithstanding my obvious personal mishigas about this, there were in ancient times genuine questions about whether somebody was dead or not. So you'd have had to be very careful what you were doing. But in terms of the sources, given that Abraham is instructed to bury Sarah, we already know that there's a biblical commandment, and the fact that we spent more than 200 years looking after the bones of Joseph to take him back to Israel tells you what importance was placed as a mitzvah in Torah.
Okay, good. And we're going to come back. Thank you. We're going to come back to Joseph in just a moment. But let's jump into just a couple of things I want to share with you. So again, in fact, let's jump into Joseph now. So the things I'm interested firstly are, what is the obligation of burial in terms of the Chevra Kadisha? Because that's the focus of tonight. Not what our personal obligation of burial is. Whose responsibility is it to bury? So we see here right at the very, 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 very end of the book of Bereshis, Vayishba Yosef et bnei Yisrael lemor. So Joseph basically makes all the Shvatim, all of his brothers, swear to him, just like he did with his father. So these bones of mine, right, I really need you to bury me where? In Israel. But at that point, they weren't going to get that same rishus, that same permission to leave. But Yomas Yosef, so he dies. Ben Me'ah ve'eseh shanim, he was 110 years old. What happens? Vaychatnu oto. They embalmed him, v'yasem ba'aron b'mitzrayim, and they placed his coffin in Egypt. He's placing this responsibility on his brothers in order to bury him. Interestingly enough, is embalming a Jewish thing? This isn't the first time we see about embalming. Who's the first person that's embalmed? Anyone know? Yaakov. Yaakov was also embalmed. So how is it we can embalm? I mean, there's a whole other shit we could give on, like, how is this possible? B'kitzur, very, very quickly, just to not get too sidetracked. My understanding from reading Mefarshim on this is that it wasn't an actual embalming like we know about today, but they had to preserve the body. As David said, the bones were looked after, but the body had to be preserved in some way. Today we have a bit of sort of modern technology. We have refrigeration and stuff like that. So the idea, according to some at least, is that there was some kind of process that the Egyptian doctors wanted to perform on him, as they would have done all their own citizens. And they convinced them, those doctors at the time, to do it in such a way in which it would, be very non-invasive, but therefore practicing Egyptian culture and also keeping in line with whatever obligations that they had there and then as well. So it says here that...
Rabbi, sorry, can I just say, interestingly,
Sure.
he put the obligation on his brothers and not on his sons.
I hadn't thought about that, but yes. How old were his sons at that point? Were they old enough to look after him? And also, but it could be also there just that they were the Shvatim. They were the sort of patriarchs of the family. They were the heads of the family. It's a good question I have to think into as to why he put it on them. The Midrash here, we'll skip over it now really. It talks about whose responsibility was it? Was it the Egyptian doctors? Was it the brothers? And again, there seems to be sort of an individual, not a natural obligation of the community, but an individual. Yosef is placing in charge someone to bury him and how he wants to be buried. What does that sound like? I hadn't thought about this until the second as I was preparing this. What does that sound like from last week? Right? Prince Philip told exactly how he wanted to be buried, who he wanted to be buried, and which direction and which car and which thing. It was all done. I was listening to a shir talking about, someone spent 20 years planning his funeral, better to spend 20 years planning on how you're going to live your life, not your funeral. But okay, let's not.
He did both.
Pardon? What, David?
No, ignore me.
Oh, okay. Ignore you. Is that a general instruction, or just for that comment? Okay, just for that comment. Good. Just good to know where I stand. But again, the other thing that's really interesting about the obligation of burial is if you look at the Kohen Gadol here in source number 7. So it says, when it comes to a Kohen Gadol, we know with Kohanim, they can't become impure, they can't defile themselves with purity, and therefore they have to stay away from any kind of death or come into contact, except for a Kohen. You can also come into contact with your Krovim, your nearest and dearest, the 7 Krovim, so mum, dad, siblings, children, parents, I did that already, but the 7 the closest, spouse. But for a Kohen Gadol, it's much stricter. But I'll call nefashot mate lo yavo, any death you cannot come in contact with. Lo avir lo imoy lo yitama, you can't even come in contact with your parents. This is a Kohen Gadol, the high priest. But here we have in the Sifra, which is sort of the halachic midrash, it wants to understand, what does that mean? Lo aviv lo imoy lo yitama, you can't come in contact even as a high priest with your parents if they pass away. What does that seem to include or exclude? So the midrash says here, v'tamei le meis mitzvah. You can actually, if you are a Kohen Gadol, defile yourself, become impure, even as a Kohen Gadol, for a meis mitzvah. What's a meis mitzvah? Someone that has no one to bury them, or someone that needs burial. It's called a meis mitzvah. It's the mitzvah of burial. And this is a Kohen Gadol that has so many restrictions, very limited capability to become in any way defiled from a spiritual basis. And yet we see here that they have an obligation to perform this mitzvah. They kind of stop what they're doing and take upon themselves this responsibility. So we have, again, this is from a couple of sources in Torah. Again, David also mentioned this idea we spoke about with Abraham, very clear. One could say from Abraham, it was his obligation from God to do that specifically for his wife, but that wouldn't necessarily translate for everyone else. But we know this is a chesed shel emet, this is a righteous deed, righteous act. There is nowhere that specifically says one person has to bury whose obligation it is. It kind of forms itself naturally from how we understand and how we should be respectful of the dead as they pass. So we also get, so where does the chabura, where does this chevra come from? And so we're flipping now to try and understand what is the obligation on the community. So here in the tractate of Smachot here, interesting enough, what would you expect the tractate of Smachot to be dealing with? Weddings, right? What does it actually deal with? Avelis, mourning, okay? So they had these particular, what does it say, brotherhoods, chaburot, groups in Yerushalayim. So they had a specific group that would go to a base Avel, to a Shiva house, to a wedding, as it's basically referring to there, a marriage feast. What's the Shvua Haben? The week in which a child is born. So this is dealing with looking after the mother, they're looking after the baby, the bris, the shalom zachor, etc., etc. And also those that gather the bones. So there were groups already now, back in Yerushalayim days, that would form for various different roles and responsibilities. And one of them being also the Avel, also the actual mourners. But before you even get to the mourners, those that would gather the bones, those that would gather the people, the dead as they pass. But really now, the Gemara, this is the go-to Gemara. And the go-to Gemara is very, very interesting. And this is going to formulate the halacha and the obligation. What is our obligation in regards to death? So we have to look at Rav Hamnuna. Comes along Rav Hamnuna in source number 10, my source number 10, I'm not sure what the sheets actually say. Source number 10, Rav Hamnuna, Moed Katan, the Gemara here. Ikla, the Dari Masa. So he gets to arrives to this village called Dari Masa. And Shmakol Shipura, the Shchachva. He hears the sound of the shofar announcing that someone had died. I don't know if ever you've been to Jerusalem and like the Mesharim area, you don't really find this on Rehov Yafo. But if you go to like the neighborhood I used to live in, or Mesharim, you know, you get these taxis or these big trucks that go around going, and they would just announce someone's died. Especially, they didn't have WhatsApp groups telling them, or automatic email, they still don't, right? Or who's died. And not only that, as we know in Israel, they like to bury within minutes, if not hours. So they would have a car going around saying this person had died from this street, and this is where the Levi is coming. So Rav Hamnuna gets this particular town. There were the shofar was blowing to signify someone had died. So what was he expecting? People kind of ignoring it or carrying on with their sort of daily lives, carrying on with their business. The blacksmith was still pounding out his things, and the baker was still baking his bread. So Amano, he says to them, Avi Anoch, Inashe Shamta. He puts a Shamta on them, right? He puts a sort of a curse on them, and execute. How could it be? Losh Hachva Ika B'Misa? There's a dead person in the town, and you're going to carry on with your work. Amrule Chavurta Ika B'Masa. So they reply to Rav Hamnuna and say, no. There's a chabura, there's a group. We are kind of all, there's different ways of understanding this Gemara. Either in the town there was one group of people that was responsible for dealing with this, and therefore we can carry on with our work, or we're all in separate groups and we each deal with our own little group. Either way, there is an assigned group to deal with a person that's passed. So he said, 1 second. If that's the case, meaning when you hear the cry of the shofar and you know you're not involved, you have no obligation to stop your work, then that's fine. You can carry on with your work. The Shulchan Aruch takes this Gemara and he says, Meis Be'ir, there is a death in the city. Everyone is now specifically forbidden to engage in any activity, any work. You hear someone's died, everyone has to stop what they're doing in order to make sure this person is buried. Anyone that is involved or sees a mace, a dead body or a death, and doesn't sort of accompany them, look after them, take part in the burial needs. So there is subject to essentially a punishment. So if you're involved or see or know about a death and you don't do anything about it yourself, you're in trouble halachically. But if there is a chabura ba'ir in that particular town, but if you know there's a group of people that are specifically involved in the needs of of death, therefore you can go about your daily lives. So we see here, this is the Shulchan Aruch talking in the 1600s or so. So there is, and from the Gemara, we see this underlying need necessary for there to be a Chevra Kadisha. Again, it isn't something that's mandated in Torah, having a Chevra Kadisha. In Torah and in the Gemara, the perspective is, if there is no specific group being assigned to deal with this, everyone is obligated. But if you assign a group of people to deal with it, then you're not all obligated. And I suppose that's really where we get from today. So we saw that in Prague, and we saw that in many, we can see this in many places. I wanted to show you and explain to you a couple of different chevra and some interesting insights into sort of how it worked in olden days. Now, can you see this very, very difficult printing? The reason why this printing is very, very difficult to read is because it's actually from the Jewish Chronicle. Lo and behold, I found this in an article, and I've kind of cut it and pasted it so I can read it out with you. This is from October the 7th, 1892. I didn't know the Jewish Chronicle went back that far, but apparently it did. 1892. David Lerner, when was the Jewish Chronicle founded? And did they go to JFS? David, you're muted.
It was founded straight after the Damascus affair, as a result of the Damascus affair. So it was 1841.
Oh, wow, it goes really back that far. So so this article was written by someone called Reverend M. Adler. And he's writing about someone called the Radbaz, Rav David ibn Abi Zimri. And the Radbaz was born in Spain. He suffered the expulsion of Spain, ended up in Tzfat. And so we're going back a good few hundred years before this was written. We're going back to the 1500s. And what year was the expulsion of Spain?
1492.
That was Columbus, no?
I think both. They were connected. I
Okay.
made it up. I have no idea.
Anyway, it's not a share about a Spanish expulsion, but he definitely suffered that and ended up in Morocco, as the article goes. And we're going to just see a little insight into an older Chevra Kadisha and some of the things they had to deal with. If you can bear with me, I'll try and read this as best I can. In those days, I'm at the top of this source. In those days, i.e. the days of Rav David ibn Rav David ibn Abi Zimri, who is known as the Radbaz, one of our great commentators. Owing to the numerous persecutions and troubles of our people, they were in much dire straits, that they were unable to inter their dead in the ordinary cemeteries. We're going into North Africa, by the way, like Morocco. It became the custom in North Africa to entrust the corpse to a Jewish ass driver, right, who hid the bodies among his own merchandise to be carried to a distant cemetery or a distant community where it could be decently buried. So obviously, the Jewish community that this is referring to were having trouble with the locals about how the burial would go, and therefore they had to sort of hide the bodies and bury them in secret by the looks of it. Sometimes out of dread of being discovered concealing a dead body, the ass driver would throw down the corpse in the open road and flee for his life. This scandal caused great pain to the elders and colleagues of our revered master, the Radbaz, and the prominent members of the community in the town of Fez assembled together, established fixed rules for the burial of the dead, and formed a society by whose means a certain number of men should in rotation have charge of the, I can't read that word, of their brother Israelites. So we are learning from the Radbaz, him forming, at least in Fez, the first Chevra Kadisha. The communities of the Mortarbians, I think that is, and Moharbian Jews, different groups there, in spite of the fierce opposition of the Mohammedans, forthwith continued themselves into Chevra. They formed themselves into a Chevra, and from that time, funerals were properly conducted. The formation of these burial societies was a part of good work accomplished by our leader. This is the Radbaz of blessed memory. So writes this Reverend Adler, so he'd obviously taken that from somewhere else. This is what him writing. This incident belongs to the beginnings of the 16th century of the Radbaz, who was the author of, and he's just going to name some of the things he authored, having been expelled from Spain in 1492. There you go, David, you're right. He probably transplanted an old custom of the Spanish Jews in North Africa, where the Chevra Kadisha had, I can't read that, had hitherto been unknown, the Society of something, or Washers, of which the late Samers Montefiore was a member. Maybe then the modern survival of this ancient institution among the London Sephardi community. Meaning, what this Rev Adler does is he's saying that the Chevra Kadisha that was formed by the Radbaz in Morocco, Fez, probably was something that he had taken with him from Spain once he was expelled, and therefore this also comes down to our very own Sir Moses Montefiore, who is involved with it here in London. Having thus followed the notices found of the benevolent burial societies in various works, some specimens of the rules and regulations, i.e. takanot, i.e. this is what you have to do, of some of them may be added. In 1693, the laws of the Chevra Kadisha, of Prague, which we spoke about at the beginning of all those pictures, written, okay, I'm not going to continue to read this because basically what he's going to do now is, I'm trying to find what he says here. He says that the laws that were created for the Chevra Kadisha were very specific and very, very, very strict. There's this, you probably won't know what this is. This is a book cover. Again, I found this image on the internet. This is a book cover that came from Amsterdam. This is the Chevra Kadisha of Amsterdam, written around, according to this auction site where I took this picture from, 1776. This is 27 pages long, specifically written for the Chevra Kadisha to follow. This booklet, 27 pages, which is in pretty good condition, in September 2020 was sold for $3,500, which I found quite interesting. And if you just look at some of the imagery, if you can, skull and bones and the Ner Hashem, this is representing either Neshama, the soul, but also that when we're around when we're around bodies, we also light candles. This is an hourglass, I suppose, talking about the fragility of life, maybe, and how our time is not infinite, but also maybe the speed in which we do bury. Takanot, the Chevra Kadisha, Geminis Chasadim. These are the laws of the Chevra Kadisha of the Geminis Chasadim, of the righteousness that we perform for the Ashkenazi community. This is a pasuk from Yechezkel, I think, that says that this is what God says towards these bones, that he will bring them essentially back to life, that there will be resurrections, there will be Techiyat HaMetim. And inside this book, and inside the laws written in Prague, I don't know if you've ever been to the shul in Prague, the Alter Shul, the Altneu Shul in Prague, and if you look at the back of that shul, there is a list of takanot, rules specifically created for that town. And on the back are the things that are specifically only for Prague. For example, again, when we were there, I have to remember what it says. Things like you couldn't daven before this shul's service. Before the rabbi of this shul had davened, no other shul could daven. And there were certain takanot that had to be followed. In that same vein, the takanot, let's have a look, see if we can find it in this previous article. In this, so they were written, one second. Yeah, here we go. It says, they ordained that every member of the brotherhood was to attend synagogue morning and evening under penalty of a fine. So if you were the member of Chevra Kadisha, you had to attend Shacharis and Mariv, otherwise you'd be fined every day. No member was to frequent the tavern of a non-Jew. Jewish taverns were obviously, evidently more to be recommended. Expulsion was to follow any disreputable conduct, and readmission only permitted after sincere apology. Fines were to be inflicted in case of inattention of duties, for disobedience to the orders of the Gabayim. Could you imagine the Gabayim having so much power? For keeping company with a musketeer, who most evidently has to be considered an undesirable associate. The subscription was to be 5 cruisers as a minimum, so you had to pay to be part of the Chevra Kadisha, and no more than 15. No person to become a full member until after 8 years probation. So you'd have to be on the Chevra Kadisha for 8 years as part of a probation before you'd be able to actually be like one of the official Chevra Kadisha. And the Kohanim couldn't enter the graveyard. In those days, they didn't even enter the graveyard. There was no Kohanim halls. So what they were allowed to make the coffins and so forth. So in the Amsterdam ones, the 27 pages, Linda, you'd have a field day with this. If you were ever able to enforce any of these rules with your staff. But it says that the head of the Chevra Kadisha had to, I made some notes, the head of the Chevra Kadisha needs to turn up to shul every night, 15 minutes before it starts, to learn Torah. At midday on Shabbat, he must learn for 30 minutes. The rules go through what shuls he can attend, situations where he should not attend shul, how many times he has to have a minyan, how much he has to pay. I mean, there was so much detail put into the Chevra Kadisha. It would make your guys. It's better they don't know. Or maybe they should know, and therefore they wouldn't complain. Not they do complain, but you know what I mean. So it's just another perspective. One final source just to show you, and that's the last one. Again, from an article I found, just to read it quickly. Again, just to get a flavor of what this idea of Chevra Kadisha was in sort of yesteryear. This was written by a professor, Avram Goren. And this is taken from an article called Traditional Institutions Transplanted. And this is all about the Chevra Kadisha in Europe and the US. And and let's just see what he says. Its sacred function was not the only source of the Chevra Kadisha standing. It exercised considerable power, or maybe say social control, because of its monopoly of burials and the somber fact that sooner or later, all would require its services. The Chevra Kadisha determined the fees for its services and assigned the grave plots. Because Jewish law required burial as soon after death as possible, normally within 24 hours, the Chevra Kadisha could pretty much dictate its own terms. It used a sliding scale of fees, age, an infant's burial being less costly, non-residency, the dead of a neighboring village were charged much more, location of the burial plot, proximity to the grave of distinguished persons, etc., and financial status of the deceased were the determining factors. Could you only imagine if that was the case? The financial status of the deceased were determining factors of how much you'd have to pay I suppose, maybe they looked at his financial situation and determined how much he could afford. Maybe that's what he's saying. Isaac Levitatz, in his discussion of the feast charged by the Chevra Kadisha, makes the following point. Woe to the rich who in life habitually failed to discharge their obligations to the community or generally fell out of favor with it. Towards such, there was no maximum to the inheritance tax it levied against them. All that they should have contributed during their lifetime and did not was now collected from their estate or from their next of kin. The society maintained that it was entitled to be exorbitant in such cases, since the money thus exacted was not for the profit of a private person, but for the benefit of charity shared by the entire community. So if the Chevra Kadisha felt that they were not, that a person wasn't charitable enough in their lifetime, they would actually just take the money before burial. The Chevra Kadisha had to, there was lots discussed. Whatever, he goes on about the power and the authority of the Chevra Kadisha that had in those days. So what I've done is just a whirlwind. I just for myself, I was interested to know and to look at the Chevra Kadisha, not just born out of a necessity to bury, but actually, if we look back through history, if we look back through a few hundred years of Jewish history, it played a crucial and central role in a Jewish community, had an awful lot of control, but it wasn't just the control, which we're looking at there. If we look back to the Takanot in Amsterdam and in Prague, just as examples, there was immense responsibility placed upon them within their own Jewish practice in terms of their davening, in terms of their learning, in terms of their commitment, in terms of the financial commitment, in terms of the time, dedication, and effort. They were not paid to be on the Chevra Kadisha. They paid to be on the Chevra Kadisha in many different examples. And it all goes back really to this obligation that seems to be placed upon the community in order that halacha states, if there's no group of people charged with doing this important, special, holy work, then it will fall upon every single one of us to stop what we're doing at a time of death and to be involved. I'm on a WhatsApp group that Linda most certainly knows about called Clicker Minion, and it buzzes every day. And it's not just the US. It's nothing to do with the US, but obviously US burials are a part of it, and it's tzaddikim. People on that group are tzaddikim, and there's just 5 needed for a funeral in Cheshunt or 5 needed for a funeral at Bushy Old, whatever it is, and people will just stop what they're doing and ensure there is a minyan at every single funeral as best they can. So they're incredible, and don't have to keep saying how incredible the work of the Chevra Kadisha is. So I just wanted to look through some of the history. From Torah through the Gemara down to the Shulchan Aruch, and also just a little bit later back through. I mean, there isn't loads of this stuff to find actually, but I found a few bits just to share with you. And that JC article I found quite interesting as well. Any questions, any thoughts, any corrections, any insights, and yeah, anything you want me to cover? I've got a couple of ideas of different topics to cover for next week, but if you've got any ideas, let me know. Linda, want to add anything? You don't have to. I'll put you on the spot. No. Again, I said we weren't really going to cover modern day stuff, but it's interesting to know that the importance of the burial society, not Bushy, just in general in any community, it's mirrored to the importance that it had hundreds of years ago. It's a very central part of the community, and it does wield a lot of power. One of the articles that we skipped just then, today, if you have a problem with someone in the community, let's just say, it's done a little bit when it comes to agunot. If someone is refusing a get, then the community will put a lot of pressure on that person. If they're involved in a business, they might revoke a license or something like that. In those days, they would use that same authority within the Chevra Kadisha to put pressure on members of the community that were not behaving properly. That would come about also through the Chevra Kadisha, because they realized everyone needs to go to the Chevra Kadisha. So sorry, David Simmons, I think you wanted to, was it you?
Yes, you were talking before about the difficulty in a particular instance of getting a Jewish person to a Jewish cemetery and having to stick them back on us or something like that. The question is, what is specific about a Jewish cemetery? Why can a Jew only be buried in a Jewish cemetery?
Oh, you're asking why can a Jew not be buried in a non-Jewish cemetery? Is that what you're asking?
Or elsewhere, yes.
Linda, would you like to answer? You don't have to. You don't want to answer? I can't. Oh, sorry. No, I thought
The only thing that I will say is that there are various towns in the provinces where they don't have a Jewish cemetery per se, but they use an area of the civic cemetery which has been consecrated as a Jewish cemetery. So that's how Jews in a lot of the small provinces get buried and where they get buried. But they are all consecrated as such, and cemeteries before they open have to be consecrated.
And that's
is that what you wanted from me?
Yeah, just if you wanted to.
Well, I guess so. I mean, I don't know what that actually means, but.
Ground. Go on, Lynn.
I was going to say when Bushy New was open. Were you at Bushy New, Rabbi, when it was opened? I can't remember.
No, it was our AGM that morning, and I couldn't get the dispensation.
That's right. And I mean, there was a specific ceremony that had to take place, and the Dayanim basically had to walk around the cemetery. I can't remember if they were holding a Sefer Torah. And they had to walk around the cemetery to consecrate it effectively.
Yeah, to sanctify the land.
Then it got buried.
Yeah, sanctify the land, and then they buried the Sefer Torah as a mark of this is a Jewish cemetery, and this is the land itself. It's not holy specifically, but we treat it with such kavod, such respect. Thank you very much for that, Linda. Then so to bury in a non-Jewish cemetery doesn't have that level of sanctity that we put in a Jewish cemetery, says Linda quite rightly said. If you go up to Birmingham, Coventry, so many of these places, then there'll be a Jewish section that has been. I went to the one in Coventry a couple of years ago, and if you go into the cemetery, into the Jewish section, they had the Ohel there, their little old building that was horrible. That's where they did the Tahara there as well, right there in the Jewish part of the section. So they would do everything there, and they would bury there. But that was obviously consecrated ground and appropriate to do so. But yeah, good question, David Lerner. You're muted, or I can't hear you. Still can't hear you. Still can't hear you. No, you're not plugged in, or you haven't got your speaker on, or. Sign language. Put it in the chat. Sorry. Unplug your thing. Still can't hear you. Nope. Anyone else? Well, he's working out how to
say something.
Julia, go on.
I just wanted to say, when I was growing up in the Sephardi community, we never called it the Chevra Kadisha, and I was very interested to see in what you were reading that it was actually called the Society of Lavadores, because lavar is to wash in Ladino.
I wonder what that word was.
That's what we used to call it, and it was never the Chevra Kadisha. So I found that quite interesting.
And that's exactly, one second, where's that article? I have that article here. That's exactly the word I didn't really understand, therefore I skipped over. Because it's a Ladino word, and now I feel much better for myself. I didn't know about it. Where's my paper gone?
I was also a member of a Sephardi shul, and there were lots of societies. So there was also the Society of the Levantadores, who were the society of people who were allowed to do Hagbun Galila.
Yes.
Oh, wow. That's also just like common sense as well, because you don't want it to be dropped. But 1 second. So yeah, he said this is the how do you say the word? The Society of Lavadores.
Lavadores,
and and all the washers, you say, because they would do
the wash. Yeah.
And so Moses Montefiore was a member of that society.
Yeah.
That's what he says here. Yeah. And he says that is the modern survival of this ancient institution among the London Sephardi community. But as you said, it wasn't called the Chevra Kadisha.
No,
where the name Chevra Kadisha came from, I haven't found, and I did look, I can't find the source, where the actual name Chevra Kadisha came from. If anyone actually knows where the name came from, then I would love to find out. It probably does exist somewhere, but I couldn't find it, but I've got so many pieces of paper here, I can't find what I'm looking for. But yes, I mean, the name's a very nice name, but where it actually comes from, I don't know. But Chevra Kadisha, but as you see, the one in Prague was called. It was called. What do we call it? It was called the Chevra Kadisha Gomli Chasadim. So, and then it's obviously been shortened now, Chevra Kadisha, rather than, yeah. David, did you want to ask something, say something? Did you put something in the chat? We have to do the Omer as well. Thank you, Anthony. The readmission under Cromwell was permission to bury, not for us to come to the UK. Thanks, David.
True.
Okay, so any other questions? Any insights? I just want to be a bit different, just to have a look into this this history. And what intrigues me most, again, is going through the obligations, going through the important responsibilities that were placed on the members of the Chevra Kadisha. And I suppose this was also just a nod to those people that to do this holy work, and to say thank you once again, and the appreciation is there. And we couldn't survive without the Chevra Kadisha, because it's such an important part of what we do and who we are. Okay, great. So if anyone does want to count the Omer, I will count it now, because it was too early to say before. And feel free to join in. I will stand for this bracha, and there I'll lean forward so you can hear me on the microphone. So it's Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu v'speisa v'sivanu as v'asa'omer hayom chamisha v'etzim yom shehem shloisha shvuos v'arba yomim ba'omer. There you go. Guys, you've been awesome. Thank you very much. Some of you might even still be awake, which is a bonus. So have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Levine.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Night. Good night.
Thank you very much. Lovely. Fascinating evening.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Interesting.
Bye.
Bye.